I always have maintained that if I was to drop dead tomorrow, in terms of my professional life, I couldn't ask for more.
In this episode, it was my privilege to sit down with Bill Melton. I first met Bill when he joined the Albert Einstein Academies Board of Trustees more than 10 years ago. Bill is a retired lifelong educator, world traveler, deep thinker, and this conversation touched on a wide range of topics, from his views on how education has changed over the years, what his legacy will be, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. Welcome, Bill. Thank you for spending some time this afternoon for this chat. I was wondering if you could start out by sharing your origin story, where you come from, who you are, what brings you to this present moment.
Well, I'm really from the East Coast. My father was a submariner, and so there are big submarine bases all up and down the East Coast: Maine, New London, where I'm from, Norfolk, Virginia, and Key West, Florida. So I really lived until I was in middle school on the East Coast. My dad had come out here once on one time coming back from Hawaii. They stopped off in San Diego, and he liked it, and so he worked it out to retire here in San Diego. So I came out here when I was in middle school, and then basically from then on I became a San Diego person. I mean, I was educated here, lived here, and I once in a while I've done a lot of skiing, so I do go to mountainous areas where there's lots of snow, but in the wintertime I do. I guess it's just in my blood. At my home I have like 6 deciduous big trees, and I remember a neighbor said to me one time, "Why do you have those trees? You have to rake all those leaves." Well, that is kind of a remembrance of how the seasons change. And then as I said, I was educated here, went up through high school in East County, and then San Diego State. And I actually originally majored in sociology, which I thought I would probably go into personnel work. And but while I was in school, I got a job at Helix High School in East County as a tutoring aide. In those days, kids had study halls in their program. And so there was a teacher of record on the name, but the college guys and girls were the ones who really helped those kids out. And the more I did that, the more I really liked working with kids. And so just before I graduated, there was a book very, very popular in those days called The Organization Man. And it was really an indictment of the business world. And in fact, it even had a chapter on how to marry the right wife so you'd be a success. This book just scared me to death because it was everything I wouldn't want in life. Ironically enough, my father had a good friend that worked for Honeywell, which is still a very big company today. And he worked it out, and the guy he kind of got it all set up so that I would get a job. And I went to an interview with this guy, and this is really the month I graduated. And I can only tell you that everything in the interview had a nautical term. On the walls, there were pictures of boats and ships, and the lamp on his table looked like one of those, the steering thing for a sailboat and all this. And he kept saying things like, we'd love to have you on our crew. This is going to be a great... And every time he said anything nautical, I got more and more afraid that I was losing my life. And so I said at the end, he says, "Well, what do you think? Are you ready to..." And swear to God,
are you ready to set sail?
Yeah, are you ready to jump in the crew? And I said, I think I probably need to think about it. And you know what? That was the wrong thing. He didn't even accept that. He just said, "No, Bill, I don't think this is the place for you."
Well, thank God, right?
Yes. So it helped me. I walked out the door. My father couldn't believe that I had turned down this job. But I told him, I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "What do you guys want in life? I had this all worked for you." Well, long story short, I had quit my job. I was looking for another one. So then I thought, well, I'll go probation. They didn't have any jobs in El Cajon or in San Diego, so I went to L.A. where I heard there was openings. I did very well in the interview. It looked like I was going to get it. I was driving back to San Diego. You have to remember this was back in the 60s, and it was such a smoggy day in San Diego that in Los Angeles, that I couldn't believe it. And the further south I drove, the more I thought, I don't want to live here in L.A. So when I got home, I, meanwhile, kept thinking, I really enjoy working with kids. Maybe I should become a teacher. And then I could do, and I gave it some thought, and I will always remember the rest of my life. My wife said the best thing you could ever imagine. I finally told her, I said, you know what, none of this is going to work. I really think I want to be a teacher, but I'm going to have to go back to school and get a credential and do some graduate work. And she said, you know what, I always thought that's what you should do, but I figured you had to come up with that yourself.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into education. And then education, I started out as a teacher at that school, by the way.
At Helix.
Helix High School.
That was pre-charter, obviously.
Oh, yes. Very pre-charter.
That's like 60s, you said,
yes.
right? Yeah.
And that was it was just one of the schools in the Grossmont district. I think it was the third one that actually, it was Grossmont, then El Cajon, then Helix. And so I started there in special ed. And I had all the credentials. I figured I'll get a job, I'll have every credential, and I did. I started in special ed, and then then Valhalla High School opened, and they had openings because people were being pulled from every school. My principal liked what I did. He wanted me in the regular program, but I was in those days. Special ed had lots of money. I felt like I was maybe jumping into something that would be not as fun. I could do so many things, but I told the guy after giving a lot of thought that I wasn't going to change, and he said, I don't like that answer. He said, so I'm going to give you one more week, and after that, I'll accept it. And in that week, I went to the special ed people and I said, what if this doesn't work out? And they said, hey, we think you're doing a great job. We'll bring you back. So in that, I went into the regular program, and I never looked back. I taught. I had such great assignments. At one time, there was a program that was a quasi-requirement called social living, which involved some sex education and whatnot. It was a new course in the district. And I taught social science. I also taught government. So they probably, I don't know exactly why, but they chose me, along with another teacher from Santana, to train other teachers who were going to teach this class. I believe it was because of my background in sociology is the way I handle it, I guess. But at any rate, so we had this extra job of training teachers. And you know what? As I did that, it was for 2 years. And as I did that, I learned to love working with adults as well, helping them to develop. And by the way, finding out interesting things that adults do the same things kids do. I had people turn in papers that were totally plagiarized and have to sit down and talk to them. Only now I'm not talking to a high school kid, I'm talking to a colleague. And but that got me in the administrative trail, if you will. And I remember when I left, it's an interesting thing about education. When I left, I taught government. As I said, this quasi-retired class was a sophomore class. So kids that I had as sophomores, I would get again as seniors, and now they were, another couple of years more mature. But it was the greatest assignment because you could sign up for the government teacher you wanted, and the kids that liked me, it was like old home week. Here they are at the door. And when I left, then I became a vice principal at the same school. I remember a colleague saying, Bill, why are you doing this? You have the best assignment on the campus. But it's because of that other activity I had with teachers. There was an adult aspect of education that I wanted to be a part of. I wanted to be able to have a say in policies. I remember when we were doing this class, we were sitting in a big room, and it was the district people, different administrators. We were the ones on the ground. We were the ones actually working with these other teachers and also going into the classrooms to see how it was being done. And yet there were other people kind of trying to direct it in the way they saw. And then I thought to myself, I have the experience. I've been in the classroom. I want at that same table where my experience can have an effect on where it's going. And it may sound a little bit biased, but I felt like some of those people who had never really been in the classroom were making decisions that they really didn't understand all the ramifications. And so that's how I continued, and I basically was very committed. I had a mentor who I'll always thank because he suggested I do this, but I went to a program in Orange County for a year. It was for principals. There was only 2 of us in there who were vice principals. He was from Orange County or somewhere in the LA area, and myself. We did that for a year. But he told me, if you do this, it'll come back. This will come back. It's going to show your desire. And by golly, when I was interviewing for a principalship, I remember it came back to me. It was told back to me that, you had these different committees you had to interview in front of, and it was a woman who was the head of one of the school's parent-teacher association, and she said, "I'm so impressed with that Bill Melton that he spent a whole year going to Orange County when there was no guarantee he was going to be a principal." So I always remembered that man gave me some good advice. And finally at some point, I became a principal, and I can honestly say, in the scope of things, it was like a dream. I always have maintained that if I was to drop dead tomorrow, in terms of my professional life, I couldn't ask for more because I wanted a principalship. I wanted to have the effect of a school and that my impact on how you could work people together.
And so as a principal, and I know you were very successful in many different ways, but one of the things that when I first met you, I learned about was some transformative work that you did at El Cajon Valley. Can you describe that and some turnaround work that you did at that school, right? I think it brought some national acclaim.
Yes, you're right. It was, I had my period there were 5 years that was just a heady experience is all I can tell you. What happened was my school where I was principal, and I had been a VP there, by the way, for several years before, and I switched from Helix to Mount McGill, another school, and then from Mount McGill to El Cajon. And so I had been there. I knew the school. The school was a high minority, low income, lots of reputational things. We were always fighting to show people that this is really a good school. Now, on the same boulevard in the city of El Cajon where this school sits is another high school at the far end of El Cajon, which is more residential, areas that had like ranch-style homes with lots of property. Most people new to the area would think, oh, those are better kids because they've got homes. We were surrounded by apartments. So I fought that all the time. And because of this and because of our low income, we were targeted with some federal money. It was an experimental thing they were going to do, and they targeted one school, and it was El Cajon Valley, my school, with a rather large amount of money to see what we could do. It was Title I money geared to try to work with the curriculum to help these kids be more successful. And so that was the beginning of this journey we took. And all I can say is that from an educational standpoint, it was just wonderful because we had some funds that we could really start to do with. I then really started to work with my staff. And I won't be exaggerating when I say that during this period of time, I had my typical day, I had 2 days, is what I used to tell my wife. I had the regular school day, and then when the day was over and people left, I used to go home for dinner first, but it was too hard to then, it just broke the thing. I would just go out somewhere in El Cajon, get some fast food, go home, and I would start my second day. I literally, for several years, never really got home until close to 9 o'clock. And because it just took much. I was also a functioning principal as well as trying to change this whole school. And the staff lined up behind me, not easy. There were a few people that I had a little group of that they didn't want to change. And I always remember that when I went to a conference, a superintendent told me one time, I was commenting about how you bring these people around to change the larger organization. And this goes for any organization, not education necessarily, just all big organizations. And she said, you know what? It's like popping popcorn. She said, when you change your staff, when you pop popcorn, what do you get? She says, there's some corn that starts popping right away. Well, in your group, that's the teachers that jump right in. They're anxious for change. They'll do it. They're risk takers, blah, blah, blah. Then the popcorn starts popping like mad. And that's your general staff. They're just now coming on board. And then if you remember how popcorn goes, then there's a few, it slows down and there's a few last little poppers. That's the staff members that have held out. They maybe aren't really for it, but they do. And then with popcorn, what you're left with, there are a few corn kernels. And what do you do with them? You tend to throw them out.
Right.
And so that's really what happened with my staff. It was that same type of thing. And when we started changing, man, everybody got into it. We got, again, I had a very good support at the district who kept funneling not just money, but the ability for me to do the things that I wanted to do. I remember this group, the opposition was a small group, but very vocal. And the math department chair happened to be this guy. And I was finally having a line in the sand meeting where we're going to move forward or what. And this meeting was right after school. Everyone was going to be there. I knew it was going to be tough. I had a bathroom off of my office, so I went into the bathroom really to get my thoughts together. Oh gosh, how am I going to handle this? And I stepped out and I saw a figure. I saw this figure just flying out of my office. And I looked down and there was a card, and I opened it up, and it was from a very popular English teacher on my campus, good teacher. And she told me, she said, I want you to know something. We're all on pins and needles about this meeting today. She says, but I want you to know you're going to do well. The opposing people, they're small, but they're so vocal. And she said, Bill, what you don't realize is the majority of the staff is right behind you. We just haven't been vocal. But wait till this afternoon. And I just walked out of my office. I went to that meeting. I felt so energized. And I started that meeting and blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, the opposition group, the guy, he was ready. He was always throwing out statistics. And so we were changing to the quarter system. And so we had all this. And he started in, and just like magic, other teachers started raising their hands and saying, excuse me, blah, 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 blah. And I could stand back and let the staff take them on, not just me. And that was the beginning of the real change at the school. And you know what? A very important thing to think about. He was a good math teacher, by the way, an excellent math teacher, but personally, he was hard to live with. And when he was in my office one day, I told him, he put out some of these statistics. Well, we researched them and they were totally wrong. And I laid it out and I said, how dare you say that? Look at theirs. I don't know where you got your stuff, but they're wrong. Yep. This is what, it was all on the quarter system. And if I live to be 100, I'll never forget what he told me. He laughed and he goes, oh, Bill, nobody ever checks statistics. And particularly when they know I'm a math teacher, they figure I know what I'm talking about. He goes, I make up some of my statistics. And he goes, the problem is you did study this one. I have never forgotten that. Wow. Because the deeper lesson in that was really a lot of people gain mileage through show and not real knowledge. I mean, we all need to learn from those kind of statements. And so our school continued. We came up with so many, everybody, I had committees for curriculum, for athletics, for every aspect of the school. And we were all, people worked, they worked. And then on top of that, we started getting attention. And that's another interesting about life. If you start getting some press, then you get more. And so somebody told the press, and they told us what was going on. And so one thing led to another, and we were invited to Houston, Texas, to present our plan at a conference. And so everybody got excited, and so we did. And of course, the district was helping me out with this. So flew everybody to Houston, and we had this, and we were so excited. We were laying out everything, and we never lied about it. Our school had its problems. We had a lot of problems in that community, but we were surmounting them, and kids were getting excited. It was a very heady time. We did that. we come home, that got press. And what you know, in the next 5 years, we went to Washington, D.C., Providence, Rhode Island, Boston, and I think and then, of course, Houston. And it was just like amazing. Every time you did another trip, there'd be more press on it. The district was just, they were loving it because there was so much publicity on this one school that had been always the problem school. And so all I can say is that it was a time that I saw change. I saw people get excited. I saw kids proud of where they were at. And so as a principal, I have to say that my time there was the best. And it couldn't be better. And then I say this, but I'm not trying to brag. But as I said, when press follows you and you start getting the good reports, it goes beyond you. And so sure enough, hanging in my den in my house is because a legislator in Sacramento heard about what was going on at El Cajon. He sent someone from his office down to spend a couple of days at our school, and he took pictures and everything else, and they went back. And the upshot of that was, and I don't remember the date, it's hanging, it's an official document from the legislature naming a particular day that year, Bill Melton Day. And I just thought how you could go full circle from, oh my God, we're getting this money, maybe we can do something, all the way to that. Yeah. So that's kind of my trajectory of education, in at least in public.
That's very inspirational, and I knew the general broad strokes of that, but some of the details really fill it out for me. So thank you. I think you've been very humble in the past, so you didn't tell me most of those things in there. But I think the education world received a real gift when you resisted the nautical the nautical businessman, whatever. Right. That sounds like something out of a movie. So you retired, and soon after retirement, you're asked to come visit a charter school, and eventually you end up on, I think in the beginning, I think that was what we were transitioning from a governance council to a formal board with a 501c3. Can you describe that whole transition and what board governance has meant to you in your life?
You bet. That was an interesting aspect because it was the year I retired. I joined a class at Grossmont College, a German class, because both of my kids are married to Germans. They met them independently, so I'm not quite sure what the stats are on that. But at any rate, we were going to Germany. One is from northern Germany, the other one from Berlin. And so I took this class. I was in the class, and the professor came up to me and said, didn't you just retire as a principal? And I said, yes. She goes, well, you know, there's this charter school, Albert Einstein, and they're getting ready to expand into a middle school, and I bet they could use some maybe some information you might be able to give them. So I took the number. At that time, the person in charge, I believe, was Lucy Fowers.
Lucy Fowers,
and I made a call, and she said, why don't you meet me here on a Saturday? And there was like one or two people with her, and I was just going to give them. So that's what had happened. And so we started talking. Now, at the time, I did realize they didn't know, like they didn't even understand campus, supervisors, because it had always been elementary up to that point. It was still a small operation. And she started asking me this and asking me that and told me this and blah, blah, blah. And what did I think about certain things they were doing in the elementary? And so I was doing all that. And then when the day ended, she said, by the way, we are now going to transition to an actual governing board, which sure be nice if you would get on that. And so I said, okay. And 10 years went by. Yep. And it was a whole different world for me, one that was also very interesting, very challenging. Very early on, I do remember, and this is an interesting side thing because I had a good friend who was an elementary teacher, and we used to travel. He and his wife would travel with my wife and I. And he and I had been, our trajectories were somewhat similar. So he was just going to retire. So he was in the last year of his teaching. And I had just witnessed here a teacher who had been given an improvement plan, and he just blew it off. And so he wasn't brought back. I just felt that was so refreshing, because in the public sector, it was far harder. And let's face it, I mean, every organization can have people that you kind of wish they had chosen another line of work. And it was a very exhaustive process. I was refreshed by that. I mean, he was given a chance to improve, but he just... So I mentioned that in the car, and this other guy said, "Oh, there you are. You've gone to the dark side." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, that's the charter movement. You know, you have no protections." And I thought that was so interesting. And I always remembered that as I spent my next 10 years in the charter movement. No teacher ever needs to worry about their position when they're doing their job. And particularly your stellar teachers would never need to worry. So I always thought that was kind of a funny thing. The coverage seems to always be for the one who's doing a mediocre job. But I just, I saw a different way of doing things. I got in on the ground floor. Now they actually went into a middle school, and where it was separated. And then I just have to jump ahead that during that period of time, it was decided that we were going to actually build our own middle school. And so during that time, the finance person she couldn't grasp that whole picture. So we did a lot of visitations in the early stages of this, probably a year's worth.
Yeah.
And we went up to as far north as LA, looking at different schools, what they look like, how they did. Every time we would have lunch afterwards, and this particular person was always there, and she always put a wet blanket on it, as if, we couldn't do this. And life, is interesting, the twists and turns of life. She became ill, so she had to leave that position. And the new people that we brought in, we went to a professional group. They told us right away, "You guys are healthy. Financially, you can do this." And so we then really got serious about maybe we can do this. And we did. And it was private. We did our own financing. There's a school up in LA called the Oscar de la Hoya School. I think he probably put most of the money into it. We thought that's what we want. Something that had this modern industrial look. It didn't look like just a school. I can honestly say that the middle school we have now is better than that one. And to this day, I'm not exaggerating, I get goosebumps. I just came up to this building today, and I look at it and I realize that I was a part of that.
Yeah.
The board had to help make that happen. And we had, I'll be honest, we had many times we worried about it. We didn't know if we could do it quite. One member of our board was a real estate developer. He at first thought it was going to be a money pit. And you listen to people like that. But yet other things suggested, no, it's not that way. And so we surmounted all those obstacles. And because of the way it was done on a private basis. I know that at that time I was president of the board. I know that I was able to come many days, put a hard hat on, and met in the office downstairs of the architects and the builders. So I was on the inside track of hearing the problems, how they were going to change it, how they did this, it was a fascinating experience. And when it was done, I like I said, I look at this building and I think, that's something real.
Yeah.
That's dreams can become real, and that building is there. A lot of people made it happen, but I know that I had a piece of that. So
yeah, and your name's on the plaque too, on the
yes,
front.
it is.
So
and by the way, in the stepping stones going up are my grandkids.
That's right. That's a family project. How has education changed over the course of your career? You've had a really interesting perspective because you had a distinguished career in a traditional public setting, and then a distinguished governance career in a public charter setting, and then you have family members who are educators as well. And then you've seen the trajectory that your grandkids have gone through in charter schools and now off into college and everything. So,
right.
What are some things that you've seen change over the past decades?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I feel that education, there's two types of change. One is the change with respect to the students themselves, and the other is with the staff. And I think that, in looking at my own experience when I was a principal and how we felt we were cutting edge, so we were doing all kinds of new things. As time went on, and then as I went into the charter movement, I felt that charter was kind of an example to me of how the public was changing kind of behind it in terms of the staff. I was always impressed with what charter teachers were able to talk about and do, and they would throw out ideas so easily that might involve their workspace and whatnot in terms of their time, whereas in the public school they were not so open. And so when I think of change, when I look at how did some of the protocols change, charter really led a lot of that. And that was refreshing. So I became a very positive charter person because I could see where it was stripping away some of the regulation is probably not the right word, but the restrictions. Mm-hmm. Having those pulled aside allowed people to be more creative. And so that I do feel is where the charter helped because, by the way, in time, the publics saw it too. And they also saw what public people were saying about, I like this because they can do this at the charter. So they figured they'd better start doing something similar. So they kind of were in tandem. Now the students were a benefit of that. When I look at the trajectory, the real change in terms of student performance, I could see were kids, but whether you're charter or public, you still had some of those same problems, which were, we're kidding ourselves if we think we're ever going to have the magic bullet that every kid is going to be, sitting there totally engaged. You work to try, that's a goal. You work for that. I can almost give you an aside. I worked with the teacher who eventually became the National Teacher of the Year when Carter was president. Now, she first was Teacher of the Year for the Grossmont District. Then she was Teacher of the Year for the California. Then she became national. She lived near me, and many times her car seemed to be in the garage, so I was always taking her to work. And after she became Teacher of the Year for California, and by the way, the reason she was so far ahead of her time, she taught women studies. There was nothing like that. She taught minorities, and she had games and things where and simulations in her room that were so far ahead of their time. That I think is the hook. She wasn't doing it for show, but she just was far ahead. But we were driving to school one day. This was like within, half the school year after she was Teacher of the Year California, and she said, Bill, I feel so, I'm an imposter. I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm supposed to be the best teacher in the state of California. And I still, in my history class, I'm teaching kids, and I see the ones who are disengaged. They're like staring at the wall, waiting for the lunch bell to ring. And we had a great discussion about that because she really felt guilty. Why aren't they all just totally plugged in? I'm the best in the state. And that's where I think we need to be honest with each other. So when I talk about the student changes over the year, there were some that allowed students to be a little freer and to do a little more challenging on both the charter and the public side. But as I said, we're kidding ourselves if we think whatever we come up with is going to be the magic bullet. And I have to go back to when I went around the country with my own school making presentations during the question and answer period. Always got somebody, and they were all educators, asking the question, what are you doing about being tardy to class?
Right.
What are you doing about absenteeism? What are you doing about kids who just don't seem to care? Those are germane to anything that we're working on. And so I find that part of the challenge because I did cut tardiness. We did. We could see it. We put it on a graph. We did cut absenteeism. Kids start showing up. For some of the reasons were not right in the classroom. They're how we changed the social structure of the school. But those are challenges, and to me, they're exciting. Now, where I have to say the biggest change I've seen in terms of student behavior, and it's in some cases, I hate to blame it. It's like everybody wants to blame the pandemic. But what I have seen, I've observed it even with my own grandkids in schools. And my daughter is a first grade teacher, and my son-in-law is a high school teacher. So I see it from all sides. Since the pandemic, students, there's a different way of how they're achieving, and I'm not sure in the long run how this is going to play out. Number one, something I was never used to as a teacher, across the board, it seems like much more leeway in terms of deadlines. I'll use my own grandson. He's a junior in high school. When his grades come out at a period, those aren't real grades, because he'll say, no, I have all these tests I can make up, and I've got these other assignments to turn in, and darn if he doesn't turn them into an A, as long as you make those things up. That's happening across the board. My son-in-law, who is the high school teacher, says it's like there is no pure cutoff anymore. Sometimes you try to do it, and it's almost like, excuse me. Many people do say it's because of the break in the regular schooling that happened in the pandemic, and so you had to start doing so much stuff from home and all that. So that's a great change, and it kind of follows into what I think is going to happen down the line. Because for the students, I do believe that within the next 10 years, there's going to be more out of school type stuff. I think you're going to have more internships, more things where you'll maybe report into class for particular checkups or working with your advisor, and then back out. In a way, that's kind of like the European style in terms of internships, which are more rigorous there. So that means if you're going to do it here, and it comes to that, we're talking about rigorous internships, so that they're not just out, filling time somewhere else. But I see the classroom becoming, it's certainly less than when I was a teacher, right, where you had specific deadlines and you had specific times to do things. And now the staff has also changed in that respect, because not being a principal myself right now, I imagine there's teachers who are very frustrated with this aspect, because if you're an old school, quote unquote, you want to think that there's a deadline and it's done or it's not done. And yet when everyone around you is allowing so much makeup, where does that put you in the scheme of things? So I think the staff, they're going through internal changes. Yeah. What is my role? What is my role as a teacher? Am I now guiding them? What is my role? I feel like that's principals on campuses right now. I believe if they're on the top of their game, they're addressing that with their staff, helping them understand. And it shouldn't, it doesn't mean having a set deadline is wrong. But if the world is changing to a degree, you've got to figure out how you're going to plug that in and make it so it all moves forward.
And I think,
does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think technology also has an impact on that, right? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
Even something like turning in an assignment used to be turn it in on Friday. Or I know my daughter's just finished her junior year in college, and we were talking about turning in assignments. And when I was in college, they would say 5 p.m. Friday. You're banging this thing out on your word processor or your typewriter, or then if you had the money, you had a computer, and you printed it out in your dot matrix printer, and you ran across campus and you slid it under the door, or you stuck it in the professor's mailbox by 5 p.m. and then their assistant or someone would come and take the basket. And now Friday could mean 11:59, 9:59.
Absolutely.
p.m.
My granddaughter, who's in college in Colorado, sent me an essay. She was concerned about her word choice, and so she asked me if I would proof it. And she had to have it in by 11:59 that night. And so you're right. All these it's also governed by technology and allowing kids to, and the choices they're making. I have to Can I give you a little
Yeah.
example?
Oh,
of something?
yeah. No, I'd love an example.
My grandson showed this to me. You know, we're all talking about AI.
And he's very tech savvy.
Yes,
Yeah,
he is.
yeah.
He's very tech savvy. And so we're all talking about AI and what effect it has on school. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with Breaking Bad.
Yes, I am.
A lot of people have seen it. Well, he and I.
My family lives in New Mexico,
Yes,
near
right.
Albuquerque.
You bet, you bet. And I have a grandson in college in Albuquerque, and he says that they have all these little signs
Yeah.
around there. So, at any rate, but Lucas, we watched that together, and so it was a good commonality. So he did this with me sitting there. He went on to AI, and he asked the question. If you are familiar with the series, he becomes a drug lord himself, and just as vicious as other. But yet he started out because of having cancer, and he's a good guy. Now, all the way through it, if you think about it, family is what's important to him. That's a good value. But in the process, he becomes a vicious drug lord. Well, what Lucas did is he asked AI, could you please, something to this effect, could you explain the dichotomy between Walter White being a good person and a bad person? Because he certainly showed exhibits of both. And boom, 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 within 5 minutes, Lucas read me the essay, which was a very well-constructed essay about that dichotomy of personalities and why it happened. And I thought, wow. I mean, when you think about it.
It'll be interesting. I remember you've spoken to your son, who's a physician, about the use of AI in medicine.
Yes.
But that's also something they're talking about, right? And I happen to know he's an emergency room physician, or he was at one point.
He is.
And so high stress environment, lots of checklists under pressure, lots of things to run, protocols to run through, right? And we're all human, and so none of us are perfect. But they're talking about AI supporting with that, running through protocols and checklist itself, and being able to analyze results. I'm not a physician, so I don't understand all the granular detail. But the concept is that it can do.
It could eliminate. He has talked about one thing. It could eliminate where the pandemic hurt, particularly in emergency rooms, is you have people out of work because of either being sick. Plus, nurses started going to other places because they were wanted
pay,
to better.
Right?
They got. It was like it's almost like disaster pay.
Yep.
And so when you'd get a new person in the emergency room, as Billy said, you have to know instantly you're in an emergency situation. It's life and death. When you put your hand out for the tool you need or the medicine, you need to know that that's correct.
Right.
But he said there was time lost all the way through this. It's now getting better because there's less movement. But the nurse who knows the place knows exactly where everything is. She's not thinking. She has to reach for it, blah, blah, blah. A person who's subbing in there and he asks for a certain drug, she doesn't, maybe, where is it? She's looking in the cupboard. And he said, and you no longer did he have the trust of when your hand went out, that particular instrument that slapped in his hand is the correct one. He'd have to stop and look to make sure. And he said, those are so small in and of themselves, but they're not when you look at the totality of an emergency situation. So AI, he said, could help to eliminate by giving you this is the way it is, and whether it's medication or something like that, they could see where in lists, things like that, it could be absolute where the person, it's like a backup to the person who's not there.
And it never gets fatigued, and it's not emotional at all, right?
Exactly.
It's not afraid, it's not anything. What do you think your personal and professional legacy is and will be?
Well, professional is, I do believe, it's two things. One, I do believe I seriously changed a school. I was the, and I don't mind saying it, I was at the tip of the spear because if it was going to happen, I had to help make it happen. And so I feel like, and for the staff and for kids that were there at that time, I believe in my heart, their lives are different because of that.
Right.
And I hear back from the staff every now and then when we'll run into them, they'll always say, "Oh, Bill, that time with you was so wonderful," blah, blah, blah. And so I know that. And so to me, that's a nice feeling to know that I helped that. And then the other is sitting in that building right next door. I literally mean it when I say I walk up those steps. I feel like of the entire time I was on the board, and because it was a new board, I was president almost 10 years.
Yep.
And so I do feel like I really helped. I was instrumental is a good word. In that one, I was instrumental in helping make that a reality. And so I thought of it today, by the way, when I drove up before I was coming. I was down at the stoplight, and when I looked down the street, I thought, there she sits. Yeah. There she sits. Because I watched it from when they were digging up the dirt, yep. And now it's a reality. And then for me personally, I believe that I've touched kids. And obviously in my own family, I believe I've been an example of taking on challenges and working through them. I believe that people who really know me and who have been around me, I believe that's what they would say. He took on those hard things and he stayed with it.
And I can say from watching you as a grandparent that and you've said this to me, that there's very little in the world that makes you happier than spending time with your grandkids.
That's true.
And I know you put extensive mileage on your car and your grandkids brought you into the 21st century with iPhones so that they could keep you tethered, and so I know that that's given you a lot of joy and rejuvenated you as well to share in raising them as well.
Yeah,
and being a role model. So you have a long and impressive resume, both professionally and personally. What do you still want to accomplish? What do you still want to see? What do you still want to experience?
Well, I'm a big traveler, and so I believe that travel is a great equalizer, and you learn so much from other people, and it balances your life out. It really does. It's hard to. I've often tried to say, when I run into someone who's never traveled, and they say, "Well, geez, I never seem to get around to it." I try to explain to them, this is not a thing of you don't get around to it. You do it because it does change your perspective and makes your life so much more richer. And so I still want to do that. I have a big trip planned this spring. And so
where are you going?
I'm going to Portugal.
Oh.
And do a week on a small river thing to out of Porto, with one stop in Spain, all the way down the River Douro and then back.
Wow.
And then from there, there's 5 of us who are then flying to Madrid, going to spend 5 days in Madrid. And then this is a funny thing. I was planning to come home. My son, who's quite a skier, they're going to be in Switzerland with a guide type thing. And he called me and he said, "Now, when is this that you're going to end up?" My trip was ending on the very day that they were ending up. So instead of coming home, I'm now flying from Madrid to Palermo, Sicily. And I'll be there a day ahead of them, and then we're going to spend a week touring Sicily.
Wow.
And so that worked out really good. And
good food all along the way, too.
Well, and there's a very interesting thing about that, the full circle. When I was in college, I had a fraternity friend. We were going to go and go to Europe together. So we saving our money. We had reservations on a ship. He was raised by his grandparents, and so they used to own a lumber company here in El Cajon. And so about, I would say, April, his mother, who's really his grandmother, said, "Your uncle," who again would be the grand uncle, had a heart attack. And she said, "Your dad can't be running this lumber thing without more help, so you're going to have to stay." So, okay, he stayed. I, of course, to me, I wasn't that mature at that age. I couldn't imagine traveling alone when, I don't know why, I didn't think I could. So I went off and I bought a Thunderbird, which even in those days, this was in the 60s. It was a 57. It was still considered a classic. Too bad I don't have it today.
Yeah.
But at any rate, when we were planning to go, I chose Agrigento, I think is how you say it, in Sicily, because it has beautiful ruins. and one part of them are under the water, so it's constantly washed, and the mosaic floors are supposed to be gorgeous. And so that's what we were going to do. Well, okay, here we are now, full circle, my age now, meeting my son in Sicily, and my daughter-in-law and I we're kind of doing the whole route. We're going to do the whole route, and I'm taking on that section and be a guide. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Clear back to, because in a way, I never had that college age thing of running around.
Right.
So
that's a gift to be able to do
full
that,
circle.
right?
So that's one of the things that and then I still also feel like I do want to be, I always want to be learning, I really do. Anything that's new, I work at technology all the time. It's different for our age group, but I really do try to learn. I've taken classes on it.
Yeah.
And of course my grandkids are great mentors. Really.
What do they call them? Digital natives, right?
Yes, right. Well, even my daughter does really well, and she's very much more techie than I am. But the grandkids, they just seem to know exactly what to do.
Yeah, my daughter is. She had an extra semester's worth of credits. It's a long story, but her college wouldn't let her graduate early, so she's taking this semester off, and she's about to fly to Ireland.
Oh, good for her.
And doesn't really have a concrete plan in Europe, which is when you're 21 and you've saved up some money, and that's a great thing, right? To
Absolutely.
just be able to be free enough to make some decisions on the fly and doing some homestay, and those are things that you never forget. Maybe I'll have a chance to fly and meet up with her somewhere if our schedules connect.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. You've been very, very generous with your time. And I have just one more question for you. But before I get there, is there anything that we haven't touched on today that has been rattling around in your head that you'd like to say, like to mention? And if not, that's okay. It may occur to you later.
No, I guess I'm okay.
You'll probably be driving home and then you go, I should have said that.
Right.
Should have said that. It's funny. One of the first episodes, I told people, look, you can, if there's anything that you don't feel comfortable with in this podcast, we can remove it, and then, so that night they called me, hey, I have an issue with the podcast. I'm like, okay, what do you want me to take out? And they said, no, could we add some stuff? Could you add in here and here and there? And I said, well, it's gonna sound kind of weird in the flow of the conversation. Let's just save that for the next episode.
I guess the only thing I would maybe add, and it has to do with your question about the kids and how they change. It's hard to put this into words, but what I was really trying to say is you could have 5 classes on student behavior, or including learning, trying to how do we teach them to learn? There's so many, and there have been over the years different plans, different programs, all geared to help kids learn. But when it's all said and done, it really is a complex. It's a complex thing of trying to match that kid with whatever program or method you're using, and it will work for some, but it won't work for the other.
Yeah.
And to me, and I really feel this way when I was at the head of and we were changing curriculum. You always had to remember that curriculum is a wonderful thing, and you can tailor it and you can work at it, and by golly, you can start seeing results. But the magic is, how do you get to a few kids that it just doesn't, it escapes them.
Right.
Not because they don't want it. And that, to me, whenever anyone talks about kids and learning, that's the magic of education, because we're always working to try to find that piece that works. And when we do it and we see that change in a kid, it's amazing. It's wonderful. But then we've always got to be thinking of that other kid. And it's never, I always think that for a new teacher, that's probably one of their biggest disappointments sometimes, because you go through all this stuff and now you're student teaching, it happens, and now you're out in the classroom, and aren't they feeling in a way the same thing that Mira Lee, the best teacher in the state of California, that's what she felt.
Yep.
Why do I have some kids that their eyes are glassing over and I'm the best person in California?
Yeah.
That's the magic of education, and we can never we never can just step back and say, it's not going to work. We always challenge and push forward.
I just spent a couple days with my two brothers, and they're both educators, and between the three of us, we have 85 years of experience in education. So that's a daunting number.
Yes.
I have a good portion of that myself, but and so we were talking about mentors, and we all went to the same schools, and so we knew roughly the same people. We're close enough in age, and the people who we cited as mentors were all different, and the people who we felt connected to were different, and despite having the same parents and living in the same household, we all came out very different with different interests and different skills and abilities. And so trying to match, I think what you're saying, what you're getting at is that there's no way to have one size fits all.
That's
right. And your teacher of the year in the state, it's a little bit like that story about the monk who's trying to achieve enlightenment, and every day he gets up and he carries wood, chops wood, and carries water, chops wood and carries water, and eventually he goes up on the mountaintop and sits there and gets enlightenment. And he comes down from the mountain, and they go, "What are you going to do?" And he goes, "I'm going to chop wood and carry water," because that's all you can do every single day. You can never give up. You can never go, "Oh, I figured it out."
That's
I
right.
mean, the teacher who says that they figured it out and that this is going to work for every kid every time, it's just, that's a big red flag right there. Yeah. Well, I can, before I ask you this last question, I can really say that this has been an honor for me to talk with you. You've been a mentor for me, a friend for a long time. I remember in my early years as the principal of our middle school, when I was, 34 years old, and an issue had come up. And I remember there was one time I went to the person who was my boss at the time. She goes, "I think you need to call Mr. Melton." I'm like, "I don't know. It's kind of a little intimidating to call him. You had just started on the board." She goes, No, call him. He's a nice guy." And I remember calling you, and you just took all the time in the world to talk through something that for you was a very basic challenge. And I was just getting my leadership feet wet. I just finished my credential. So as we've both kind of grown in our lives and our experience, you've always been someone who I looked up to. And so that's, if you can, for whatever it's worth, that's part of your legacy with me. In the Einstein community. My last question is this. So I happen to know you live in East County, so I know you take the 8 freeway east every day, or you will after you leave here. So this is a hypothetical, but you're given the chance to design a billboard, Bill Melton's billboard, for the side of the freeway, on the side of the 8 freeway. And people are passing it at 70 miles an hour, and they're tired going home from work, or they're excited in the morning, whatever it is. What does Bill Melton's billboard say to the world?
Well, something that I do believe in myself. It would say, Bill Melton, he cares. And that kind of wraps up not only the personal side of my life, but the professional. I did have somebody ask me once, it was a strange thing that whole year of working so late, and I did have somebody say to me, "Why do you do this? Jesus, it's just it's your school. You've got another life. Why are you doing this?" I would drive home and I think about that, and you know what? Because I cared about that school. I cared. And probably the best thanking I've got is from other people that I worked with at that school. I've heard them say that word. They say, "Wow, Bill, when you were there, man, you cared." I lived that school, 24/7. And I'm that way with my family too. So I guess caring, and I'm not bragging.
Right.
I'm not bragging. I just feel like, and so if I, or if somebody said, when I'm gone, What do you think of Bill? I would like to think that he cared about what he was doing. That's why we didn't give up on this building.
Yeah.
When we had,
When we could have many times.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think that's a apropos place to finish today. Bill Melton, he cares. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on today and to chat. It means a lot to me.
Well, thank
you, Bill. Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.